Welcome to the 5th video in this Getting Started series. This video is compatible with VCarve Desktop, Pro, and Aspire. In this video, I'm going to show you how to take some 3D content, create a composition, go ahead and show you how you could sketch carve that, and then move on to showing you traditional 3D carving, a lot like what you see here. Let's get right into the software. Okay, as you can see, I have a fresh instance of VCarve Desktop up and running. Now, again, it's important to remember that the tools we're going to cover in this tutorial are also available in VCarve Pro and Aspire. So to start out with, we're going to create a 3D composition, and I'm going to show you two different ways to cut that on your CNC. So first of all, we're going to go over and create a brand new file. It's going to be a single-sided job, and the width of this is going to be 9 inches. The height is going to be 6. And the thickness of my material, I happen to know this time exactly what it is because I have the material right at hand. So I'm going to put in 0.759. Okay, and of course my units are in inches. We'll be zeroing off our material surface. Our XY data will be set to the bottom left-hand corner. And because in this case we're going to be using a composite layout or some 3D content, we're going to make sure that we turn up our modeling resolution to very high. That'll give us lots of pixels to work with, and we'll get some really nice detail in our end toolpaths. Our material setup, we're going to go ahead and choose out of this list Canadian Maple because the results will be a little bit easier to see. And we can just go ahead and click OK. Because this is going to be a 3D layout, we may as well go over to our 3D view. Now in our 3D view, we can go ahead and use our right mouse button if we hold it down to twiddle our view. We can also use the view control to do exactly the same by left clicking on that and rotating it around. And then I can go ahead and single click on any of the faces to bring me to that angle. And in this case, I'm looking straight down on the top of my 3D job space, much like a bird's eye view. Now let's go ahead and look at our Clipart tab. And I've gone ahead from my V&Co account. I've downloaded all of the free 3D and 2D content that comes along with my software, and I've installed it, so it's available for me. The first thing I'm going to start off with is going to be a plant. So we're going to look for plants and fruit, and we'll scroll down until we see the Magnolia. And I'm just going to simply go ahead and double click on that. And when I do that, it will bring it right up into the center of our job space. And you're going to see that we have all of our control handles all visible in the 3D view. And we also have some other specialty controls here to add shape height, base height, and we can scale this component if we want to. For right now, what we want to do is we want to size it down. So that's around about 5.5 inches. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and click on this bottom right-hand handle. And this will allow me to change the shape of my 3D content proportionately. So I'm going to change the bottom number to be 5.5. And when I do that and I press enter, you'll see that proportionately my flower has been sized down. I could have gone ahead and pressed the tab key to move over to my other field. I'll just show you that. So I can click this again. If I press tab, it will bring me over to the other field. If I wanted to scale based on that dimension, then I can go ahead and just type in a new number and press enter. So just off click that for now. And we have a look at that actual Magnolia. That looks really nice. There's lots of nice detail there that I think we can get with our CNC machine. Okay, let's go ahead and look straight down on that again. Now, the next thing we're going to want to do is bring in a ribbon. So let's go over to ribbons and banners. And we're going to go down to our 3 banners here and double click on just banner.v3m. And that'll pop that banner again right into the middle of our job. I'm going to rotate that about 180 degrees. So you can see the rotation handle right here at the top. If I click on that, I can type in 180 and press enter, and that will rotate that around for me. And now by holding down the Alt key, I can just drag it down with my left mouse button depressed. I can drag it down to where I'd like it to be. I'm going to put it right around here for right now. And I think you need to size it up a bit more. Now, typically when I'm doing a 3D layout, I work very organically. So I'm going to do the same with this ribbon. I'm going to hold down my shift key and left click on this bottom sizing handle here. And I can scale this up until I get it to be about the size that I want it to be, which in my case is going to be around there, I think, probably. I'm looking at the numbers, and I'm also looking at the 3D preview so I can tell how big this is actually going to be. Now I'm going to use my cursor keys to nudge that up into place, and what I'm looking for is right over here. I want to make sure that there isn't a hole right there. I don't mind this gap, but I'd like for this hole to be removed. So we'll just go one more time, and that looks pretty nice. Now I'm going to off-click everything and have a look at this composition. The next thing I want to kind of address is that the ribbon is merging into the flower. And over here we have this petal that's over top of the ribbon. And that looks really quite nice, the petal, but this is a problem. It doesn't look very natural. And in the end, this petal overlapping the ribbon might cause me some problems when I'm putting text on this. It might get in the way of some of my lettering. So just to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to raise up that ribbon so that it covers up that petal. And to do that, I'm going to add some base height to the shape. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to hold down my right mouse button and rotate around just a little bit. And then I'm going to use this option right here to add some base height. So I'm just going to hold down my left mouse button and drag up. And when I do that, I'll be adding some base height to that. And I'm looking at over here where this is now over top of this leaf. The petal now tucks underneath my ribbon. And over here, there's a nice little bit of definition here between this petal, or this leaf, excuse me, and the ribbon right there. So I'm actually pretty happy with that. I'm just going to make sure that everything is lined up the best it can by right-clicking and dragging this around and having a peek at the edge of this. And what I'm looking at is the actual heights of all of my components to make sure I'm making the most use of my material thickness or of this composite layout. So the idea is that any high points of my flower should be equal-ish, if it looks right, looking down on it, to the high points of my ribbon. And that looks really good, I think. In the end, I'm really happy with that. So let's go ahead and look back down the top of that again. And there we have it. Now, the next thing I want to do is to lay out some text on this ribbon. To do that, I'm going to tile my views. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit in the 2D view until I have that ribbon right in my view so I can see it in its entirety. Let's go over to our Design tab and go down to our Draw Text tool. And in this, I'm simply going to type in the text I'd like to have on that ribbon, which is happiness and joy. I just need to go ahead and choose a font that looks good. So I'm going to go down to Candria, which I like that font a lot. And if I zoom out of my 2D view a little bit, I can see it here, and I can just drag it down on top of my ribbon where it belongs. I could have also done that in the 3D view. Zoom back in again. Hold down my Shift key, and we're just going to scale that down until it fits on there. I'm happy with that, so we can go ahead and close down our Draw Text dialog. I'm going to position this so that the H is kind of in the center of the ribbon, up and down, like that. And then I can go back into my text tool for a minute, and I can grab this green handle, which is actually going to curve my text for me, and I can pull it down until the radius of the bottom of my letters kind of matches the radius of that ribbon. And I can let go and close this down again. Use my cursor keys to nudge it up into place. I think that's nicely positioned where it needs to be, and I can see it here in my 3D view as well. Let's go ahead now and maximize our 3D view. Okay, I think that's a really nice looking layout. I like that a lot, and with that added text, I think it's going to turn out really good in the end. So let's go ahead now and explore the two different styles of cuts that we can make with this layout. So let's go over to our Toolpaths tab. As always, it's really important that we check our material setup before we start to look at our toolpaths. So we're going to go into Set. And we're going to make sure that we check our material thickness. As I said before, I was lucky enough to have it on hand, so that is the exact measurement of the thickness of my material, which is great. Our datum is going to be set to the bottom left-hand corner. We're going to be zeroing off our material surface. And our model position is going to be at the very top of our material. Now, if your material happens to not be as flat as you would like, you can drop that model down into your material if you'd like to. But for me, I'm going to put it right at the very top. That way the face of this ribbon will actually be at the face of my material. My rapid Z-gaps above my material and my home start positions are safe and appropriate for my machine, so I can go ahead and click OK. Now there's two different ways that we can go about cutting this composition. The first one is going to be using our Sketchcarving feature. Now this feature will take a bitmap or a 3D composition or a single 3D model and create a 2D version of that will cut really quickly like a VCarve toolpath. The next option we're going to look at is actually to create the proper 3D toolpaths to cut this in 3D. So first off, let's have a look at our sketch carving. Now, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about sketch carving, please have a look at a related video called How to Use the Sketchcarving Toolpath, where we'll go into each and every feature here in depth so you can get a good grasp on how you can use sketch carving in your projects. For this, we're just going to touch on the features that we need to get this to work for our project. So it doesn't matter which option we choose, either a bitmap or a 3D component that we're going to be sketch carving, we should tile our views so we have a good look at the 2D view and the 3D view. Already in the 2D view, you'll see that there are some green lines already created. These green lines are actually where the toolpath is going to happen in 2D on the surface of our material, much like a V-carving. So we're going to have a start depth of 0. For right now, we're going to leave no flat depth, but if there was some really wide areas of green in our 2D view, then we may opt to have a flat depth so that we don't push our V-bit too far into our material. But for right now, we're going to leave the flat depth turned off. We're going to use a 60-degree V-bit to do our cutting with. We're going to machine our model boundary. So the toolpath will be limited to the boundary around our 3D composition here, or our single model. We could also choose a vector or a selected level, but we're going to use the model boundary. We're not going to use a boundary offset. And the tracing parameters, or the line thickness that we're going to try and machine, is one of the key features of sketch carving. Right now it's set at 13, but we can go ahead and use our slider and drag it up to be even thicker if we would like to, and you can see the result in the 3D view. We can also go ahead and do a much thinner version if we'd like to, and you'll see what we have here again in the 2D view. So by using the line thickness, we're telling the software how much detail we want it to pull off of the 3D component or composite layout. We're going to go back to 13 because I think for this particular job, that's a nice setting. We're not going to project the toolpath onto a 3D component. We're just going to cut it right on the surface of our material. And we're going to go ahead and call this just sketch carving, and then we'll calculate that. Let's go ahead and maximize our 3D view for a moment, and you can see where this toolpath is actually going to cut. That's a really nice sketched version of that composite layout. Let's go ahead and look back down the top of our 3D view, and we'll preview that visible toolpath. And that looks really nice. And in the end, what we might want to do is go ahead and color that toolpath, or color our finished project maybe with black, so we can get a good sense of what that's going to look like. And that looks really nice. Okay, let's close this down. Now we can add to that, of course, our V-carving that we have here on our ribbon. So we can select that text. We can go ahead and choose the V-carving toolpath. And again, we're only going to touch on the features that are important for this project. But if you're interested in more about the V-carve toolpath, then I highly suggest you look at the related video called How to Use the V-carve toolpath. We're going to turn off a flat depth because we're going to cut right at the very top of our material. We're going to use that same V-bit. We're not going to use a clearance tool. We're just going to go ahead and rename that VCarve text. And we can calculate that. Then we can preview our visible toolpath. And we'll also go ahead and give that a color. Now that looks really nice. And you can see how nice that would look on an already pre-made plaque, or maybe on a project that you already have cut, maybe the top of a table, maybe a sign for outside, or maybe even a memorial plaque. It would look really quite nice, and it would cut really quick. Now, all of the tips and tricks that we have listed in the How to Use a VCarve toolpath apply to a sketch carving toolpath. So keep those in mind when you're going to utilize this toolpath. Now, to keep this file nice and neat and tidy, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put these together in a group. So we're going to right click, and we're going to create an empty group down here. We're going to select that group. We're going to right click on that, and we're going to rename that Sketchcarve. Press enter. Then I'm going to drag each of these toolpaths up into that group. And you see how that line below the actual Sketchcarve text has been shifted to the right. As soon as I do that, you'll see that it adds it into that group. Then I can take the VCarving text and move it in there as well. And there we have that nice group now, so we can hide and show that group of toolpaths, and it's organized for us. So in this case, if I wanted to have a project where I have a Sketchcarve version of this layout and also a proper 3D version of this layout to offer to my customers, I can keep them both in the same file. Okay, so let's go ahead now and explore how we could 3D carve this in a material. For this particular layout, I think it's best if this was a standalone piece like an applique. So we're actually going to cut it out of our material. Typically, there are two different toolpaths that we employ to cut out a 3D carving. And that would be our 3D roughing and our 3D finishing toolpath. In this case, we're going to end up with 4 toolpaths. We're going to have a roughing, a finishing, a VCarve toolpath, and then a profile toolpath to cut the part out. So to get started, we're going to need to have a profile vector that represents the outside border of the final part we want to cut out. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and flip back over to our design tab for a minute. We're going to select the 2 components in our 3D view that make up the border of our layout. So that would be the flower, and hold down the shift key and grab the ribbon. Go over to our modeling tools and have a look for create a vector boundary around selected components, and click that. And you can almost see it there. There's actually a vector that goes all around the outside of our composite layout. So what we're going to do is we're going to off click our models. And if we tile our views just for a second left to right, you can see that in the 2D view, there's that vector right there. Okay, so let's go ahead and maximize our 3D view again. Now we can right click on that vector once we have it selected, and we can go down to ungroup it. And we're going to ungroup that back onto our original objects layer. We're ungrouping it because if we take a look in the actual vector here, we'll just go ahead and unselect it and select it again. There's some areas that we don't want to actually include in a profile cut or a boundary for a 3D roughing or a 3D finishing toolpath. And that'll all make sense in just a second. So we're going to go ahead and again right click on that. Go up to ungroup, ungroup back onto our original object layers, hold down our shift key, and deselect the outside vector that we want to keep. And you see that the inside ones, or the extra vectors, are still selected, so I can just press delete on my keyboard, and I'm left with that one outside profile vector. Okay, let's go back over to our Toolpaths tab. Now we're going to have a look at our first toolpath, which is going to be our 3D roughing toolpath. If you'd like a little bit more information on how to use the 3D roughing toolpath, there will be a related video below on how to use the 3D roughing toolpath. But for now, we're going to go ahead and use a 1/4 inch end mill. And the idea of a roughing toolpath is to go in and remove a whole bunch of material so that we can go in with a smaller bit and safely remove a thin layer of material to give us all the detail. We don't want to risk breaking that little tool, plunging too deep into our material. So we're going to use that 1/4 inch end mill, which will do a nice job removing all that material out of there. We're going to go and use the selected vector as our machining limit boundary. So I need to go back in and make sure that that vector is selected. And there it is, purple there. You can tell that it has actually been selected. We're going to cut outside of that a 1/4 inch. And typically, I recommend you cut outside of that border the diameter of your cutting tool. It just gives you a little extra room around the outside of your project. So when you go in to do your finishing pass, you can also overshoot your model a little bit and get rid of some cusping that may happen along the outside perimeter of your model. We're going to leave a little bit of material behind, so 0.04 of an inch. Again, that's that thin skin of material we're going to go back in with our finishing pass and remove. The roughing strategy will be Z level roughing, so we're going to pocket down through our material, opposed to using a 3D raster, which would closely follow the surface of our model. We don't need to worry about that because these bits that we're going to use are pretty robust, so we don't mind if there's a little bit more material left behind. And you'll see what I mean in just a second. We're going to leave the raster angle at 0, so it's going to cut back and forth and back and forth. We're not going to worry about ramp and plunge moves, and we're just going to go ahead and rename this 3D roughing, and we'll delete the 1 out of there, and then we can calculate that. Reset our preview, And we can preview our visible toolpath, and you'll see what I mean by it cutting down and removing a lot of that material. So it's pocketing down, and all we need to do now is go back and remove that skin of material left behind so that we can reveal all that nice detail of our design. So let's go ahead and look back down on top of that again, and we'll close down our Preview Toolpaths dialog. The next one we're going to do is look at a 3D finishing toolpath. So we'll select that. And again, if you'd like a little more information about this, there'll be a related video below called How to Use the Finishing Toolpath. We're going to use a 1/8 inch ball nose end mill, only one tool. We're not going to use two tools. We're not going to employ the rest machining feature. We're just going to use the 1/8 inch ball nose. We're going to use the selected vector boundary, and you'll see it's still selected from our last toolpath. We're going to go outside of that boundary 0.1 of an inch. We're going to do a raster toolpath. Again, we're going to go back and forth like we did with our roughing toolpath. We could use an offset tooling that works from the middle and works its way out, but for ease of use, we're going to go back to the raster one. Raster angle is, again, going to be at 0, so it's going to go back and forth. And now we just need to go ahead and rename this 3D finishing, and we can calculate that. Now if we just kind of move it up on its edge and we preview that visible toolpath, you'll see that tool going in and removing all that extra material. And what happened, remember that 0.1 of an offset that we added in? That allowed us to overcut the model, so when we go in and do a profile cut around the outside edge of this, we'll get rid of all of that cusping that's there. Okay? Let's look back down on that again. Let's close this down. The next toolpath we're going to add to this is going to be the VCarving toolpath. So we'll select the VCarving vectors, which is the text, and then we're going to go ahead and choose to create a VCarve toolpath. Again, if you'd like a little more information on the VCarve toolpath, then please have a look at our related videos. Start depth of 0. Now, even though this ribbon might be curved, like not only from left to right, but also up and down, you'll see how it kind of trails off the edges here. We're still going to start at the material surface, but then we're going to project that toolpath onto our 3D surface using this Project Toolpath onto 3D Model feature at the bottom of this form. So we're going to start at 0. We're going to use that 60-degree V-bit. We're not going to use a clearance tool. There's no need for that. We're not going to worry about any of the other options here. We're just going to make sure that we turn on Project Toolpath onto 3D Model. If you don't turn that on, what you might see is that the this end of the H and this end of the Y will actually start to look thinner than the rest of your text because that ribbon is starting to bend right around that area there. So we're just going to go ahead and rename that VCarve. Put a dash in there and we'll call that text, just so we remember. And we'll calculate that, and then we can preview that visible toolpath. That looks pretty good. The last toolpath we're going to need to do is a profile toolpath to actually cut this applique out. So we're going to select this outside border that we created earlier. We're going to go to our profile toolpath. And like the other toolpaths, if you'd like more information, there'll be a related video below. Our start depth is going to be at 0. But I also realize that I've removed some of that material already. So there's going to be some air cuts that are going to happen along the way. But as a beginner, that's not a big deal. You just waste a little bit of time air cutting. Once you get more practice with your toolpaths, you'll be able to tell how deep you've cut, and you can save some time by not doing those air cuts. We're going to cut all the way through our material, so we're just going to put Z in there and press equals, just so that we can be reminded of what that cut depth is, or what the material thickness is. We don't need to show our advanced toolpaths. We're going to turn those off. We're going to use that 1/4 inch end mill that we used earlier. We're going to cut outside that line. We're not going to worry about ramp or plunge moves, but we are going to add in some tabs. So let's go ahead and turn that on, and let's edit our tabs. These numbers seem pretty appropriate for this size of a project, so I'm happy with that. So we'll edit our tabs. Go ahead and center our model. And we have the option of actually getting our software to go ahead and add in tabs for us automatically, or we can choose where we would like those to be. And in my case, I would like to choose where I like those to be. I like to put them on areas that I can easily get to and sand them off. So in this case, I'm going to drop one on this line just by left clicking on the line, and one over here as well. I'll add one in here, one over here, and then probably this seems to be like an easy spot I could probably get to if I needed to. One out here and possibly one there as well. That should hold that in place nice and safe. Let's close that down. And we're just going to go ahead and call this Cutout. And we can calculate that, preview that visible toolpath. And you'll see now we've got those tabs in place. It's going to cut it out nicely. And that looks really good. So the last step I want to do is just a little bit of organization down here before we save off our toolpaths. So I want to put these into a group. So we're going to do what we did before. We're going to right click. We're going to create an empty group. We'll just right click on that group and choose rename 3D carving. And we can just drag these up into that group. Again, that way we can keep both options available to our customer in the end. I don't need to rework all this. There we have it, and that looks great. Cool. Now let's go ahead and save those off. So we're going to close this down. Now is a good time to review your toolpaths to make sure that you can't group any of these together and save them off as one toolpath. And in this case, we really can't because we're using an end mill for the roughing pass, a ball nose end mill for the finishing pass, a VCarve bit for the text, and then that same roughing tool to cut out our project with. So we really can't group these together. So what we're going to do is save these off individually. So let's go to our Save Toolpaths. Let's go ahead and select Visible Toolpaths to multiple files. We'll just go ahead and turn all these on. We're going to choose our machine, which is going to be our Shark SD110, okay, and that's the proper post processor. We can just go ahead and click Save. Then all we need to do is just give this group of toolpaths an overall name, like for instance, Flower 3D Cut. And we click Save. The software will automatically go and save all those off. And let's have a look at what the result was of saving those off like that. So we have Flower-3D Cut number 1. This is our roughing toolpath. Flower 3D Cut 2, our second toolpath, is the finishing toolpath. And you can see how the software's gone along and named those appropriately for us. And we even know what order to run those in because it's named them Cut 1, Cut 2, Cut 3, and Cut 4. So that's really quite handy when it goes to running those. We have all those toolpaths ready to go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my material to a fixture to my CNC. And for that, I'm going to use double-sided tape this time. So once I have that all ready to go, I'm going to save off my toolpaths onto this USB drive. I can put it into this pendant that's hooked up to our Next Wave CNC, and that's where I can load my toolpaths off of to make sure they run. I'm going to fixture this or stick it to the bottom of this CNC, and then I'm going to need to go ahead and set up my datum. So my XY datum as it was in my software on this material. And then I'm going to use the touch probe to go ahead and set my Z distance of my bit off the top of my material. Again, like I did in our software. So let's go ahead and get that started. Materials down, we've set our XY datum, we've set the Z height of our bit using the 0 plate. Now we're just going to go ahead and load in our roughing pass to get this job started. Well, I'm pretty happy with that in the end. It was really quick to carve and it looks really, really nice. With a really simple finish too. Now in this video, you would have seen me take two different 3D components, create a composite model, show you how to create some really simple 2D toolpaths from that called Sketchcarving, and then go ahead and show you how to make a full 3D carving like you see right here. And I'm pretty happy with that. And that's the last of our VCarve desktop and pro videos in this series. If you're interested in Aspire, then please have a look at the next video where I'm going to show you how to take some free 3D models, do a little bit of 3D modeling to create you a brand new house sign. See you then.